Okay, we welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is an audio and video show where I interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and narrated by the guest in our show. Today's guest, Prachi, is someone who I was fortunate to meet at a book club here in Mumbai. And I've always been interested and curious about her recommendations and thoughts on books, but there's so much more to her perspective and a little bit about Prachi before we jump into this conversation. So, Prachi is a technology consultant by profession and a humanist by heart. Born and brought up in Mumbai, she has lived in New York City, Seattle, Raleigh, Bengaluru, and a self taught writer, an avid reader, and a budding patron of the arts, she believes creativity is deeply embedded in the human consciousness. She hosts silent readings at Fictionary Bandra and curates art crawls for creative communities in Mumbai. She has been working on the manuscript of her debut nonfiction book, To Wonderland, a collection of essays, poems, and short stories delving into the identity of a young woman navigating the modern world of interconnected digital and analog experiences. So, Prachi, thank you for making time for this.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
I'm very excited about this, Prachi, and we normally start the podcast with this question. Tell us some stories from your childhood. So you mentioned you were born and brought up in Mumbai.
Yeah.
So what was Prachi like as a student, in those years? What were you curious about at school and outside school? So maybe just give us a background about growing up in Mumbai to start off.
Yeah. Firstly, I have to say that even though I've traveled the whole world, Mumbai is my favorite city. And I'm very lucky to be born where I am. I've been living in the suburbs of Mumbai and Santa Cruz since I was born. And because of the neighborhood I've been part of, like I've been exposed to like a lot of different things. So from like when I was very young, like it was very normal for me to like run into people who are doing theater, like have been surrounded by people who want to do something in life. So even when like we were kids in the playground, like there were a lot of us who would like do acting shows, and even in school, like theater was encouraged, public performances were encouraged. I have a sister who's an architect. So both of us have a very small age gap. So we always had each other. And luckily back in the days there was no social media, that we weren't hooked onto the phone. So all the time we spent with each other. And a lot of that time was spent in free play. We were exposed to art very early on. Like our parents never stopped us from like drawing on walls or like doing something out of our toys. So we had a lot of free time in the afternoon after school, and we would end up spending that time like either drawing on walls or like putting junk together into like some artifact or something new, or we'd have imaginary games that we'd play from that. So I think my childhood was really fun, like because like I don't think there was any exposure of digital, or like we had a lot of unstructured time outside of school, and we were free to use our imagination to come up with different games. So yeah, I think that really kind of, I think that was pivotal in terms of like me up for my creative career in many ways. And I think even as an adult now, I think I kind of look for ways to have that unstructured free play in my life because it feels so much at home. Other than that, I think I also really enjoyed playing in natural spaces because of the area I was in. The beach was always stones throw away. So like say if my mom is not around, then my cousins and I, like we would all go walk towards the beach. We would play in the sand. We would make sand castles. I think back then, I think even animals were allowed on the beach. I know it's not healthy for the animals, but it was normal for us to like see like a horse cart or like an elephant. I remember sitting on an elephant in the at Juhu Beach. Like that's not allowed now, but like those kind of things like really helped me connect with nature also. I think apart from that, like there were things which I really enjoyed myself also. Like though my family was not very religious, we always had this ritual. On Sundays we would go to temples. Like my dad loved seeing all the different temples in the city. But the part I liked about going to the temples was when I would get to feed the cows or the buffaloes. So that's how like my mom would tempt me. She would be like, "Oh, you have to feed the cows. Don't you want to go?" So I would like get up so that like I could pet the cows. Like I had named some of my favorite cows in the stable. So I love my childhood. I think my parents gave us a lot of liberty to use our time however we wanted to. Both of us, me and my sister, we chose art in some shape or form. She became more close to it and she chose architecture. She's a creative director now. I chose to express my creativity in different ways. I think as I grew up, I think I grew closer to writing and words. And that became like my way of like staying creative. What else? Yeah. I also like, because we had a lot of children in the neighborhood who also had this kind of unstructured free play, we would go to each other's houses and we would help with like craft projects and things like that. There is, I don't know if you know about this place, there's this publicly funded hobby center called Balkanji Bari in Santa Cruz, which has also now become like a sports center. But they also promote a lot of like local craft and hobby classes over there. So they had very peculiar classes there. Like they had something like how to create like artificial flower arrangements, or doing embroidery, or making best out of waste. So they had these very interesting crafty classes, which are not normal now, but were normal back in the day. So because it was so close to my house, again, it was one of those things that a lot of the kids in the neighborhood would do. Like we would compete in those classes. We'd like, oh, my flower arrangement is cuter than yours. Or like we would also make mistakes. The teacher would teach us something, but when we came back and we had the same material, we would try to like make something which is not a flower but still looks like quirky and fun, and we'd compete with each other that way. So I think a lot of my creativity actually I kind of attribute to where I was born. I think I was really lucky to be born in the neighborhood that I'm living in even now.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much to unpack there, Prachi. You know, the fact that you had a sister who was not, and the age gap wasn't too much over there. I mean, it's almost like having another person to experience and understand life with from a young age in that sense, right? And you know, one thing I wanted to ask you is about your life as a reader. You know, growing up, did you have a lot of readers in your house? You know, because I've noticed that you have such interesting books that you read, whether it's fiction or
Yeah.
nonfiction, and you're also a writer. But I'm always curious about the seeds of where that curiosity for this world of books sort of started from. So if you could tell us about the readers around you growing up, and maybe the first books that you remember reading, and when did this world of books really open up for you?
I think for me, I think in my family particularly, there was a lot of emphasis on English. So my dad was multilingual. He spoke Arabic, Marathi, Gujarati. I think he spoke a couple of other languages also, which I don't remember now. But he was a very big fan of languages. When during dinner time, he would come back at 7 p.m. and then he would ask us what we read today. Like he would be at work, and but at dinner time, this is like how we would connect. Like what did you read today, or recite like a poem which you really like. So it became a ritual which kind of, I think, helped us want to read more. We always had books at home. We always had books which were age appropriate. Obviously, both my parents loved reading, though they read the newspapers and the dailies and the magazines more than literature. But we did spend a lot of time on the weekends sitting with each other where we are all reading, right? Like they are reading all the adult stuff. We are in the same room. We are probably like going through like our workbooks, or like are reading the books that are probably that age appropriate books that we have. We were also told a lot of stories, regional stories. Like because I'm Gujarati, there are a lot of regional stories. We loved bedtime stories. Like I would hear the same bedtime story again and again and again and again. And I would wait for the twist even when I knew it. Reading, I think, was more about language and about stories for us, and not necessarily about like how many books you've read. Stories kept us entertained. We didn't like, we had very limited TV time. Like even though like we had TV, like we had like 1 or 2 hours which we were allowed to see. All the other hours were for the adults. So because we had limited TV time, like I think stories kept us entertained. I think we would also end up making our own stories because of that. Between me and my sister, like we would make up our own versions of the same story. So this is like I'm talking about, this is like when we were like 5, 6 or younger. As we grew older, I took to reading more than my sister did. I started, this was because in school we had like a mandatory library period, and I just took to all the regular books which all the kids do, which is all the mystery books. Like I love reading the Famous Five and the Secret Seven. I eventually took to the Hardy Boys because I was like running out of content. And then as I grew into my teenage, I started reading like other things. I started with the classics, which is like Agatha Christie and Enid Blyton. But because like all the other kids were reading Sweeter Valley High, I was like, okay, maybe I should look at this also. So I moved into Sweet Valley High and Nancy Drew. So most of the books I read in my early days were around mystery thrillers, solving like a problem, things like that. I think the last children's book kind of author I read was Roald Dahl. I think I read a lot of Roald Dahl like around when I was 14, 15 years old. But after that, I outgrew children's book for sure, because then it was 10th grade, and then like there were other things. I think your youth catches up with you at that time. So then I started reading more challenging things.
But you were surrounded by books and people that read around you. I love that story about, the family sitting together and reading different things. I feel like, for a lot of young people, looking at the adults around you and seeing what they do becomes sort of a primary motivator for, picking up something. And I think seeing people around you read, no matter what it is, I
Yeah.
wonder if it did set up sort of this small subconscious seed of maybe that being a fun activity to explore, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. I think I had more of that because I think we had a very big family in terms of cousins and extended family too. So then I got like, this is like when I was younger, obviously I was like more under my parents' supervision and school. But like in my teenage years, like I was hanging out more with my cousins. Like then you want to like impress your cousins so that you want to keep up with what they are reading. A lot of my cousins were guys, so then I started reading comic books because they were much older than me. I think Spider-Man, Superman, they were all on the horizon. So like because they were reading that, like I started reading that at a very young age too. So definitely I feel like the people you're surrounded by and what they're reading has some sort of influence on you for sure. I think when I was very, very young, like I think around, I don't know, young is a relative word. When I was like around 16, 17, was when like from my maternal uncle, he introduced me to the freedom movement. So like then I started reading Gandhi. So I read like the autobiography. So my experiments of truth very young when I was like 16, 17. And that, because I read that at a impressionable age, like I got very interested in history thereafter. My sister was also exposed to the same thing, but I took to this more than she did. I think then she started expressing her creativity in a more physical form. She grew closer to wanting to draw and paint and illustrate. I built a deeper relationship with reading around this time. I think, yeah, this is like, I chose my path on creativity as I grew older.
And was it always English as a language? And like, I'm curious about your linguistic identity. Like, do you think and dream in English? And were you reading or watching things in other languages in addition to English at that time?
Yeah. So
Or
between the ages of 10 to 16, I think I was very impressionable. So I would consume different formats. Like I would be reading and talking a lot in English, but I was also learning Gujarati. My parents felt it was very important to know my mother tongue. So I spent the extra hour to do that. We were taught Marathi in school, and my nanny, she was speaking Konkani. So, like, I got exposed to Marathi and Konkani stories through her, like verbally, but not written. Hindi is obviously everybody speaking in Hindi. I had a great Hindi teacher. All the Hindi teachers in school loved me for some reason. But the Hindi stories were very different. Like the Hindi stories I read resonated with me a lot emotionally. And that's probably why the Hindi teachers might have liked me, because like I would answer with deep thought for the Hindi stories versus the English. In English, I had to prepare and practice more versus the Hindi stories. But I think after school, it was just English. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep up with my reading in Hindi and Gujarati. So I think my Hindi and Gujarati maturity is a little lesser than I would like relative to English. Because after school, I started writing also. So that changed my relationship with the language a little bit.
Sorry.
Because then like I started seeing, because I was writing, I wanted to write better sentences. So I went out of my way to like study grammar. I went out of my way to improve my vocabulary. I still have cue cards to learn new words, which when I'm very free, I still go through. But I wanted to be able to use uh, good words in my spoken English and not just like written English. I think because I wanted my writing to improve as well. And there were a lot of students in school who I particularly admired, who were very good at elocution and debates. That also motivated me. That really motivated me, because I was like, I saw myself as somebody who was also wanting to be good at elocution and debate. So I didn't participate much in debating back then, but because I wanted to associate with folks like that, like I practiced on improving my arguments, the way I'm speaking a lot more in English versus the other language.
Yeah, because I think that's something that a lot of us growing up in India do have to navigate and maybe think about, right? Because we do have English as a language we use maybe in school and work, but it's also our mother tongue, and then Hindi. And I think in a way it is a privilege to be growing up embedded in the world of so many languages, and even if we don't completely turn to it at a certain point, the fact that we have the option of being multilingual helps us just have different worldviews through the stories we hear in these different languages. Now, Prachi, I wanted to ask you about your time in college, which is always a difficult and fun and exciting, but also transformative time for most people, right?
Yeah.
You did a Bachelor of Engineering degree in computer engineering, and then you pursued a Master's of Science in integrated marketing. So these are two sort of different fields, and there was also a gap between both your degrees. So I'm curious about this time between 2007 to 2016. What was Prachi thinking? Was it always engineering, and how did you make that decision? And then how did you shift from engineering to marketing as a possible sort of career option?
Yeah, I think teenage is a really, really rough time. I had a unique problem because I was creative and good at my extracurricular activities. My heart always pulled me in that direction. But I was also good at sciences. I was very good at all my subjects in sciences, pure sciences. I liked mathematics also. So it wasn't because like I was forced into it. There was some element. Obviously, your parents want you to do what is, if you're academically performing, there is this pressure to like choose engineering. But I was also good at it. I think I was a little good at this also and that also, and I didn't want to give up either. And there weren't many people in my family who had chosen a purely creative career at that time. So I was like, okay, let me give it a shot. Let me give computer science a shot, because programming also has an element of creativity when you're writing code. So it wasn't marketed that way back then when I was a kid. And I felt bad about it. There was a part of me which was like, I am a creative person, but engineering is not seen as a creative option. The profession doesn't allow you to express yourself creativity creatively
Interesting.
traditionally.
Yep.
So that was always like a very big conflict within me during my college years. But I got very lucky, and I got elected into the student council from my first year in engineering. So all those 4 years, I got to be part of the student council, and the student council was responsible for running the college festival. And I was always vying for the creative department. So I started as like the junior creative leader for the student council, and as I graduated, I was like the head of creative for the college festivals. We had two college festivals. We had a cultural festival and a technical festival. Technical festival had competitions in robotics, and there were like puzzles and like a lot of other things like that. And cultural festival was a lot of dance and like theme based events, fashion shows, music concerts, etc. So I got very lucky that the college I was in allowed me to express myself in both ways. I got to learn programming, and a lot of it was self-taught. A lot of it was self-taught. I think classroom education was not as exciting to me as like my own approach to like learning programming, which I experimented with a little more because I was trying to do things which are not going to be in the exams. So that way of learning programming kept me engaged with that side of things. And the all the other extra time I had was just like mingling with people and doing things for the cultural festival and the technical festival. So I got very lucky. I got to do that during my college years. And as I graduated, again, because I had good grades, I was again confused. Like I have been so successful in managing to express my creativity in a way that benefits the world. And I also have good grades in engineering. So what do I do now? I had a campus job. I got placed in Infosys in my final year, and we had a waiting period during that time. And I was very tempted to not take up the Infosys job because I felt like I was at the peak of my creativity back then. And I was like, I should try to at least attempt to give myself a shot, like at a career where I can be my full creative self and explore that side of me. And I got together with one of my college friends, and we started a creative consultancy. That was my first attempt at doing a business. I was 19 years old, and it went well. We were consulting. So basically, we were doing creative strategy for other engineering colleges and festivals that they are running. We got a couple of projects. We got into corporate gifting. I also did like very personalized gifts for high net worth individuals. So it started off well, but I felt like maybe I need to like chew on a bigger problem. I got very lucky again and got an internship at Ogilvy and Mehta, which is one of the biggest advertising agencies in India. And the person who interviewed me, she also came from an engineering background. So she was like, wow, I'm so glad that the young people are still trying to take a risk in their careers like this. So I got to be on like the best account. I got to be on Cadbury, and Cadbury does phenomenal campaigns. So my internship, which was non-paid, turned into a full-time job opportunity, and then I didn't have to take up the job at Infosys. It was a complete just series of decisions which were like following my gut, and it led me to a very different path. I loved my time in advertising. I met people who were so different from my colleagues in the engineering college. And I was like, wow, there's like so much I still have to learn. Like I used to feel so good when I used to do all the different projects creatively in my engineering college for the festivals. But then I realized that there is so much I still have to learn. So after the first year where like I worked on some really interesting campaigns, I got exposed to digital marketing. I think digital marketing was very nascent back then. And then that really excited me. I was like, wow, the world of technology and creativity are coming together. I was like, okay, I have to explore this space. So I took a gap year after that. after the first 1.5 year. I was like, I really want to get into this space, but there weren't many opportunities back then in India. There was no formal education in digital marketing. So in that 1 year when I took a gap year, I was trying to again figure out how do I get into this space. So in that gap year, I started writing. I became a freelance writer. I worked with people from the advertising space, people in startups back then. And I also started looking at education abroad. That's what led me to go to NYU, where I chose a very specialized course because I always knew this is what I want to do. So I could have done the traditional MBA. I had good grades, I had a good profile. Even my counselor had recommended that you can do an MBA. Like, you can do an MBA, why are you not going for an MBA? I was like, no, I'm very sure. Like, I want to be specialized in digital marketing. I want to do something in this space. So that's how I ended up at NYU doing the integrated marketing course.
And what was New York like? I mean, people often draw parallels between New York as a city and Mumbai as a city. Was that because you grew up in Mumbai? Was that your experience, or you thought that New York was a different beast altogether?
I think New York is 10x of Mumbai, but it felt like an extension of Mumbai and a better version of Mumbai. So I immediately fell in love with New York. And the city is so vibrant. And again, like, the city also is like bursting with creativity at its seams. So I really took to the city instantly. Like, you're out at walking in a park and then you see somebody like playing on their banjo, you're on the subway, and then you'll be seeing somebody do like a one act show. So and the street art there is also so really beautiful. uh Theaters at like a walking distance. You can go to Broadway, you can go to off Broadway, you can go to off Broadway. So I think my master's degree was sure educational, but even living in New York by itself was an experience for me. That's also the city where I felt like I could have a dual identity, because like whenever I would go for all these plays, I would meet people who would say, this is my day job, I'm a writer. So this was a very new idea for me, because I never met people who would confidently say that this is my day job. I actually am this in India while I was here. And meeting people like that made me realize that I could also pursue like a dual path in my own life. That way, I felt like New York was a revolution for my own growth.
Yeah, because when you say New York is 10x, and you also mentioned that Mumbai is still your favorite city, so I think I'd love to come back to that about, as someone that's lived here for a really long time, what are some of the things that you have really enjoyed about Mumbai as a city? But I also wanted to briefly talk about something you mentioned earlier. You said that growing up, you didn't necessarily associate creativity with something like computer science. And I'm curious about that because um, I always wonder, I think all fields, creativity is not just a liberal arts thing, right? It is creating something new in any sort of discipline. But
Yeah.
sometimes creativity is branded in a way that only if you pursue the arts, maybe you are a creative person. But computer engineers or physicists or chemists or biologists, the way they do the basic sciences and conduct research, that can be very creative in terms of how they use established processes, but think about it in new different ways. I think engineers are also wonderfully creative in how they solve problems using the knowledge that they have. I wanted you to maybe talk about your years, because once you were done with your master's degree, Prachi, you pursued a job with a large tech firm for 2 years and you moved away from New York. So if you could tell me a little bit about your professional years. You worked for two large technology sort of companies. Like, in addition to talking about what you did in those jobs, briefly, I'd love to maybe understand what were some of the other things you were doing outside work at the same time, and how were you navigating this tension of being creative in your professional world and also pursuing this identity of being a writer and reader at the same time. Sorry, that question was quite long, but
No, it's pretty much in on target with what happened during those years.
Yeah.
So my time in US actually was really helped me understand these parts of me a little deeper, because when you're a kid, like, you're just doing whatever's coming your way, and you're just figuring out what's good, right? I think after graduating from college, after doing my masters, there were things which provided more joy to me, which did not have the same level of joy for my peers. So I had started developing very peculiar interests in certain things, and I like spending my time in a certain way, which a lot of my peers maybe would not have liked. Like, for example, the fact that in my free time, I would rather go for a play than like go for like a social gathering. There were very few people who did that. Like, I would go out of my way to make friends who uh, would help me keep that side of me alive. I ended up becoming really good friends with theater artist, and then she introduced me to the whole world of theater. And she was also like writing scripts and things like that, and she was also an avid reader. I found people who were not in my regular path who would somehow still have these similar interests. And I think in New York, you get to do that a lot. You find people who are doing specific things, who are deeply interested in all these different hobbies. Even when I was doing my campus job as a student, I still would take out like a couple of hours to go for this like hobby group. It was called Pen Pals NYU. So different like students from different departments would come over there, and we would discuss poems, and we would have writing exercises, and we'd share poems and things we would want to write. It was complete. There was no like, it wasn't very structured, but I love the fact that like I still, even though I had a hectic schedule, I would still make time for these things. I would not promote it. Like, I don't think a lot of my friends even back then knew that I was doing all these things. It was almost like I was leading a double life. And I wasn't doing it consciously. Like, I was not doing these things consciously. I was just following my curiosity. On Sundays, I started a ritual of writing a blog. Most people would want to go for brunch with friends on Sunday, because that's when the concept of brunch had become very popular. I would be like, no, I'm going to stay in and I want to finish writing this blog. It was an odd choice, but somehow it was on Sunday mornings where I would have the burst of creativity to write something. So I would write. I maintained a blog called Simply Prachi for many years. I'd started it when I was 18. And when I was in New York, I felt the need to write a lot more. So I started writing as a student, and even when I got into my job in Microsoft, then I was maintaining it, because there were a lot of things I was observing, I wanted to express, but a conversation with a friend was not the right format to express those things. And I felt like writing a blog about these topics was a great way to like cathartically realize what's going on in my head, and also like connect with people, because a lot of the things I would write were like things related to my perspective as a student, or like my life in New York, or like my identity as a woman. And my generation of women had a lot more freedom than maybe previous generation of women. So I was also trying to figure out like, how do I navigate this sense of freedom and sense of having my agency, right? Like having agency to define your own life. Like, how do I go about it? So a lot of my blogs were closely related to these ideas. I also wanted to stay in touch with my friends, even though like I was having a very hectic life as a student, as an immigrant abroad. I craved for some sense of familiarity. And I think Skype was very popular back then, but networks were not great in India. Let's just say that. So I would write letters. I would write long letters, long emails to people I felt very close to, because that was a way to give them like a sneak peek into the life I was experiencing. I wanted to keep them involved. So that way I stayed in touch with writing and expressing my creativity in some shape and form. When I moved to Seattle is creatively different compared to New York. I think New York is more extroverted as a city. So it's got a lot to do with performance art. In Seattle, I think I got deeper into my hobbies. I think I don't know if this city has changed now, but I felt like Seattle, Portland, that whole area was more of a hobbyist city. So I got into clicking pictures and like writing haikus of the pictures I was clicking. And I tried to get into the craft side of things again. And I read a lot more in Seattle than I did in New York. I think in New York I was writing a lot more and I was closer to performance arts versus like in Seattle where I started reading more, writing poems, short poems, but like not very long thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think like the book that you're working on, it was sort of in development for all these years. I think I'm
Yeah.
wondering if it's like an extension of that blog. And I know you have a wonderful Substack, which I will also include in the show notes. And in the Substack, I love how you're able to, maybe freely talk about the things that sometimes are difficult to talk about even with your closest friends, right? And I think it's interesting to listen to you talk about writing as a way to express those deep emotions, those deep thoughts, those deep fears, those deep hopes that maybe we don't sometimes have the space to do in our daily lives, even if we are surrounded by people that love us and want to hold that space for us. And also growing up and, becoming an adult in that age of social media can be quite tricky because there is this illusion that social media connects us with so many people, but many of these relationships can be parasocial in terms of people knowing about these important events in your life, but never really knowing the other parts that we maybe don't always share on
Yeah.
these platforms. And like even navigating life as an immigrant must not been easy and challenging, especially in that time. And navigating a very fast moving career in the world of technology, because things are always changing in that world, and I assumed you'd have to constantly upskill in
Yeah. So
that sense.
I also consider myself very lucky because I got to see that transition.
Mhm.
Because I was in the thick of it. The work that I chose was very close to was creatively satisfying, but like slowly, like technology was such a big part of it. Instagram was also like a tool for expression for me back then. I don't think what Instagram is today versus
Mm.
when I found it. The people who were there on Instagram back then, totally different. Like it was genuinely a way to meet people who want to creatively share their lives. So I met a lot of, back in the day, I met a lot of photographers. There were a lot of these photo competitions which had themes in it. And then I would explore cities because of the photo competition. And a lot of hobbyists were on the platform. So I got into food plating and I got into taking landscape pictures of the urban environment I was in. So it was very different to meet people that way. But I also started seeing that what I was expressing on these mediums, like I was active on Instagram and a little bit on Twitter, but I started seeing that like my friends perceived my life entirely based on what I was putting on these platforms.
Mm.
And I had to go out of my way to like share what is happening verbally, to like give a fuller picture of what was going on. I'm trying to maintain long distance relationships. I'm trying to keep my friendships intact. I don't get to talk to people as much. So that was definitely a period where I realized that the world of technology is slowly starting to shape even my relationships. I think
Mm.
WhatsApp was just taking hold. WhatsApp groups had just started as a feature, and it was slowly growing as a product. And even in the groups, there was a new thing which was added, which was the tick mark. And if the tick mark is blue, it's a read receipt, basically.
Yeah.
I, being me, so lost in my own world, never took that so seriously. But
Mhm.
My friends took it very seriously. My friends took the fact that I didn't read messages very quickly, or like I didn't respond right away very quickly. So I got to witness that time of like how technology had started like shaping my relationships also, and like how people interact with each other. I used to love sharing links with people about like this obscure poem or like this obscure Hungarian recipe which is vegan. I was that person who would like make playlists. This is the old days of the internet, okay? I was that person who would make very cute playlists for very specific things that only the person who I'm sending that playlist to would understand. But all that magic started getting like lost because I think people wanted different things in how they would relate to each other. At least that was my observation. And I tried to write a lot about that too. Like when I was writing letters to my friends or writing essays in my blogs, I captured these experiences in some shape or form. And last year, when I took a sabbatical from my corporate career, I went back to writing. I felt like writing called me again. And I was like, I read all my old material. I was like, this is the gold mine. I have recorded all these experiences, which a lot of people have not seen or like don't know that, like, it's a very minor difference, right? Like, just like what a WhatsApp group can do to like your friend circle. It's a very small thing. But like, I recorded that. I wrote about these things. I wrote about how my relationships changed. And I feel like maybe not my generation, but maybe the younger generation could benefit from reading about these experiences, that like how relationships could be without all of these other interferences which shape human connection.
Yeah. And even that perspective of being maybe like a late millennial, where I feel like the people born in that time, late 80s, early 90s, they're sort of that border sort of generation that had some time without being immersed in the world of technology, and then suddenly being like bombarded with every single tool that promised this potential of being eternally connected to someone in this digital world. And I think even in your bio, you mentioned navigating the modern world of interconnected digital and analog experiences as a woman. I find that really fascinating. And I think you're right. I think the collection that you're working on, and even your blog, Prachi, I think it's an archive of how young people could be. I mean, it is one person's perspective, but I think it's when you combine these individual perspectives, you really get the collective sort of narrative in that sense, and like in this part, I wanted to ask you about moving back to India. You mentioned you've lived in cities like Bangalore, Pune, and Mumbai. So your life as a adult in your 20s and 30s, living in India, being like a technology professional, if you could tell me about how technology sort of, in the sense of the book that you're writing, To Wonderland, like what was life like as an adult in these metro cities, navigating relationships and work heavily embedded in this world of technology for you?
Yeah. So I wasn't conscious, honestly, when I was going through moving from one city to another. I moved a lot in a span of like 7, 8 years. I moved and lived in like 5 different cities, which is a lot. But I was always plugged in. I was plugged in. I was in touch with people through WhatsApp, through social media. So I never felt like I was disconnected. It took me a while to understand that I was a little disconnected. When I came back to India, I think the illusion that I'm connected with people uh, kept me excited about like I can move. It's like I'm not losing out on a lot by putting roots right now, because I felt like I was working with the same company for the longest time. So I was still talking to the same people every day, even if I wasn't meeting them, right? So I had this virtual network of people who I was always in touch with. I would travel a lot. I would fly to meet people. So I think my perception of my relationships was deeply intertwined with my digital interactions with these people without ever having that moment where I'm investigating where I actually stand with all the people. All my relationships were hinged on the last conversation or the last meeting I had with the person, which I felt very confident about. When I moved to Bangalore and Pune, again, like I think there was a lot of stuff going on. Google Pay had just come into the country. Ola and Uber had just come into the country. Amazon was moving into the country. Amazon moved, so Flipkart started. So when I moved to Bangalore, I think I moved back to India, I think the digital revolution was just starting. Right, like 5G was becoming available. Geo had come into the picture. 5G was privatized before it was BSNL. So there was an internet problem. That's why we couldn't think about doing a lot digitally as a country. So it was an exciting time for me to be a professional who was witnessing all this change happening in the country. It was also very exciting to see that I had opportunities at home. Like I didn't have to go abroad to do the same thing. And I was working on the same kind of problems. So it was very, very interesting and exciting for me. I spent a lot of time at the workplace because of that. And I also started meeting people through apps instead of meeting people in the real life.
Yeah.
And I think I might have experimented with all of them. I've seen the early days of Tinder, or then Bumble, and then Pile, and then whatnot. So, uh, I've seen how like that has shaped relationships as well, because that was also something that my generation witnessed first, I think. So that way, I think I had a very interesting time when I came back, because I felt like my life was not different. It was not different from the time that I had lived in US, because I was living pretty much the same life, except for a few inconveniences here and there in terms of like speed of internet. I think that was my biggest complaint. I think apart from that, I felt like life in US and life in Bangalore and Pune was not very different as a technology professional. And I loved it. I loved the connectivity I felt because of all the different digital platforms at that moment in time.
Yeah, like even what you mentioned about the availability of technology in terms of dating or meeting new people, right? There's always this paradox of choice and this abundance in terms of options that the apps give you. You know, especially as a young person navigating this, I think there's also a gender lens to this, right? How men, women, and people of other identities or other genders also explore. This is so different, right? In terms of what you look for the app and even how certain apps position themselves, like Tinder positions itself very differently than an app like Bumble,
Yeah.
right? And they're both, and Bumble was also created by someone that was part of the core founding team at Tinder, and she noticed that there was a particular gender narrative that was set at Tinder that maybe wasn't being addressed for women that were using these apps, right? And I find that so interesting how they were solving such important problems. But I also see so much frustration in friends, when they're exploring this, that it's also created this idea of just giving up on people too easily because there are so many options available when you are exploring this world. And I'm curious, like, how has technology, not just with relationships but also with reading, and watching films, like I use these apps called Goodreads and Letterbox to maybe learn about what my friends are reading or what my friends are watching. Instagram sometimes, and not as active on it, but I think it's helpful to know what people are doing. But I am also very, because I know that people don't always talk about the more difficult parts of their lives on these social media platforms, so I think, yeah, like in terms of reading and writing, how has technology maybe helped you and opened up this world for you as a reader and writer? And before that also, Prachi, I know in your Substack, I was reading that you were exploring this idea of a health app.
Yeah.
This year in some of your pieces, you spoke about creating this app to monitor, and I'd love to know more about that idea as well, in addition
Yeah.
to how technology helped you as a reader and writer.
Yeah, sure. I think as a reader, I'm just like now going back to my working years as a working professional. As a reader, honestly, I think I was distracted for a bit. There
Hmm.
was, because I was in the zone of consuming, right? Like OTT had just happened. All these new shows, original shows had come up, and all these really exciting concepts which were not explored on the big screen were now explored. I think I was dragged in that direction a lot, to be honest. There were years where I was not reading a lot because there was a creative boom all of a sudden in the storytelling. I think my reading had come down a little bit, but Goodreads kept me honest. I don't think Goodreads has changed through the years. I know a lot of people don't like that, but because Goodreads has stayed the same, I have stats which like date back like 10 years. I think Goodreads has been like my historical database to know how many books I have read and how many books are still in my TBR. But in the last 3-4 years, though, I have felt like I think it's time to change, because from a technology perspective, because our attention is so easily stolen by other apps. And unless you're an avid reader who has an active control on their time, I felt like there needs to be a new way to like show books that you want to read, or like stay in touch with the idea of reading which is not related to viewing content. I did try Blinkist, to get back into my reading. I think that was my first step into be like, no, it's been too much content and I've been watching too much TV and I need to get back into books. So I started with Blinkist, which had like all these summaries of books. It was non-fiction mostly, but because it gave me the illusion that I'm still in touch with books, that was the first app I started using to get back into a habit of reading. Also Oprah's book club, because I was traveling so much and I was not attached to any reading group as such, or I wasn't part of any book community at that time. I feel like Oprah's book club was my go-to because Oprah is so popular. Like, you can't miss her recommendation. You'll see it on social media, you'll hear it on radio, you'll see it on TV. There's just no way you're going to miss it. So the books she would recommend were some which I would fall back to when I didn't have anybody around me who would recommend books. In terms of writing, though, I think the emergence of things like Grammarly, Hemingway editor, they kind of helped me with cleaning up language a lot more. Autocorrect also changed the way I was shaping sentences. I also moved more from like handwritten notes and writing in my books to typing when I was writing blogs, because like earlier blogs I was still writing in my notebook first before like putting it in the WordPress or something like that. But I then, because Grammarly and Hemingway editor became so easily integrated into Word docs and things like that, I started relying on having a MacBook or like a proper laptop where I would work on my writing as well. Made me feel a little disconnected, for sure. I tried writing journals also like that, but that didn't work for me. Like, I've been maintaining journals since like I was 15 years old. I felt the need, because I felt like there was a lot of distance between how I was feeling and how I wanted to express myself. I felt like I had to do a intervention with myself, and I started physically writing in books again. And maintaining journals again in the last 5 years. That really helped me get my attention back. Otherwise, I was in that loop of like seeing what is the next content, or like keeping up with my friends and like discussing the shows that they are seeing. But I wanted to like stay in touch with my writing, and journaling and physically writing, that really helped me capture my attention back. So that's a little bit on the reading writing front in the last couple of years. I also started wanting to be with people who are reading actively or want that in their life. So far in my life, I was privately reading. I wasn't reading in public, and I used to feel shy to share with people things I want to read, because I have a very eclectic taste. Like, I'm not like confined to like sci-fi or historical fiction or literary fiction. Like, my taste is very eclectic. It's very led by curiosity and like things which are intriguing me in that moment. So I used to feel shy to share my taste with people, but I felt like I had to break out of that. I had to break out of that. I had to meet people who were also reading. I think the silent reading movement, which started with Bandra reads, Juhu reads, that really broke me out of that shy shell. That's where I was like, okay, no, I should share what I'm reading with other people. And I noticed other people sharing their reading journey. So that really was again a change in like my reading experience as a person, reading publicly. From a writing perspective also, I realized I have to do that. I have to meet other writers. Like I can't just be writing by myself. Writing is a very isolating creative hobby unless you're collaborating with people. So I started like meeting other writers. I started um talking. I started positioning myself as a writer. I was like in the closet kind of a writer. I wasn't sharing that I'm a writer. Like most people in my life, even professionally, know that I like writing, but I would never like proudly say that I'm a writer because I felt like I had to do all these thousand things before saying I'm a writer to people. But I do write. Like I have written like reams and reams of journals. I have maintained a blog over the years. I felt like it was a very big imposter syndrome I had to break out of. When I did that and I met people, I started doing like how people do extempo speech. I started extempo writing. I think that made me feel confident about my identity as a writer as well. And that's this where what all has happened since I broke out of that is when you met me. So the rest you are aware.
Yeah, I love that bit about being like an eclectic reader, and I completely relate to that because there used to be a time where I was a little nervous about, talking about what I'm reading because I would just read randomly. And I do feel like I love general nonfiction, I love fiction, I love poetry. And it's also something I've been feeling more recently, this idea of fatigue when you're consuming media, especially in this age of abundance, especially with regards to media options, where OTTs become so accessible and affordable, which I think is the second big key, the fact that it's so affordable. So much media, not just from India, but all around the world is suddenly thrown at you. And, socially, you're expected to watch the coolest shows, read the most important books of the time. And I've been struggling with that, like personally, in terms of how do you choose books you want to read? How do you choose a show you want to watch? How do you choose a film? And I feel like it's something that everyone navigates very differently. I've come to realize, some people are very dependent on recommendations or what the book club is reading or what their friends recommend. Some people are very focused on what they get from digital sites and other people. And I think book clubs, like online book clubs, in-person book clubs, are other great ways to also explore this. But Prachi, there's so much I want to talk to you about and ask you about, but I will be linking your digital profiles in the show notes, whether it's your wonderful Instagram account about books and what you're reading, your Substack where you explore, your thoughts and what's going on in your world, and even your LinkedIn profile, for someone that's curious about what Prachi is thinking about reading, writing, working on professionally. I would recommend following that because I think 1 hour is too less of a time to really understand so many of these different worldviews. But to conclude this and just to respect time, I wanted to maybe think about recommendations. Like I know you've read so many books, films, and I was also part of this wonderful thing you started called the Art Crawlers,
Yes.
which, if you can briefly tell me about that before we go into this recommendations bit, the Art Crawlers bit, and also the silent reading community that you run.
Yeah. So in the year I took a sabbatical, I wanted to feel connected with people and I wanted to feel connected with people with a way which is not digitally motivated. And silent readings became like a very big way to do that for me. I first was a passive silent reader, as in like I didn't participate with the community and I just showed up at Bandra Reads and Juhu Reads. And then when Fictionary opened last year, I don't know, something about the place just felt like I belonged there. And I give all credit to Anu for the bookstore he's created and the community he's curating there. So I just started showing up over there every Saturday. Every Saturday, I made a commitment to myself that I'm going to spend 2 hours at Fictionary in the morning. And my commitment got intertwined with a bunch of other people who also started showing up over there. And then again, it's become like a whole uh, micro community by itself where we all come and we are reading. But apart from reading, also there is like a lot of time we spend on just free play of thoughts with each other. Like there is no pressure to like introduce yourself and like come as perform as a certain person, and you can just share your curiosities and build rapport with each other based on the things you're reading and your curiosities, and an entirely different identity from what you do otherwise in your life. So that has been a really powerful catalyst in my own creative work. And as a writer, because I'm writing on a manuscript, you want that. You want to like unshackle yourself and want to read more and think more, so you can write better. So that became a thing I started doing. And from that experience itself, I ventured into the idea of doing an art crawl. All these months we've been sitting in a cafe and exploring ideas, but then I wanted to take that experience out of that store and into the world. And art crawl became like a way to do that. It came up again in a conversation that like there's a new exhibition, and we started talking about the art movement of cubism, and we were like, oh my God, we should all go. And because I had such deep curiosity on the subject, I felt like I should introduce this experience through my lens to other people. So that led to my first art crawl with this micro community. And everybody loved it. Everybody loved it. I didn't have to have artificial icebreakers because people just love talking to each other based on this view of art, of what was shown to them, because then it became like a different way to relate to people. And then everybody started requesting that I should do more of these. So we did a couple of them, and now everybody's asking that I need to do it in different parts of the city with more artists, with different forms of art. So I realized that there is definitely a need. I feel like we are all craving for deeper connections, and the idea of the art crawlers of Mumbai community is to do that, to give people deeper connections through immersive experiences where you explore art and culture in a particular city, in a particular area. So yeah, that's like we are starting small, and let's see how it grows. I'm very excited to bring this to more people now next year.
Yeah, and I'm excited to attend more of these, and I will be linking that in the show notes as well. Prachi, for the last question, what I wanted to ask you was maybe about this is also very difficult, for someone that reads and watches and engages with art so deeply. So maybe a book, a film, and an art piece recommendation that over the past few years you have held very closely to you, and in some way I'm curious about how you talk about the things you love, not just why someone should read the book, but about how that book maybe got you thinking about the world in a very different way that you may have not done if you hadn't entered that world, or the same with the film, or a piece of art that
Yeah.
has really stayed with you.
Oh God, this is a really tough question, but I'm going to
Yeah.
take a stab at it.
Yeah.
I think for the book, I think it's very easy. I think it is Isaac Asimov's Robot series. I think it's also converted into a movie which stars Will Smith. I read this before I started engineering, and I think it was very important and pivotal that I read it back then, because it helped me have a view of like what could be the impact of technology on humanity. I think very early in my career, I read things which made me want to think about that. It shows, and it helped me show up differently in my role as a technology professional in the way I make decisions. So I love that I read that series so early in my life. Highly recommend it to everyone. Even if you don't read sci-fi, or you're not a science student, highly recommend reading that series. Don't watch the movie, read the books. In terms of a movie,
Could be a TV show too, or like whatever comes to your mind. I mean, I think this is a very subjective sort of current recommendation. I'm sure it would be different if we did this a month from now.
oh God, it's very hard for me to pick any one thing, to be honest. But I think I'd choose something which reflects my character. I think I don't know if people, I think it should be mandatory viewing. But Gandhi, Richard Attenborough's Gandhi, I'm saying the director's name right. I used to watch it every Independence Day, and I loved the journey that a man took in his life to do something very big. It really inspires me that, and it also makes me believe that the human spirit can achieve anything. So it's a deeply inspirational movie for me. What else? How do I have to recommend? Book?
Like a film and a piece of art, like a painting or a sculpture, or
Piece of
it could be a painting if you want to start off,
piece of art, piece of painting.
or an artist that you've been following.
I think in the modern day, I think you should follow the work of Banksy. He's very on point, and I think he, to me, represents what an artist can do. They can take their art and they express what are the issues of modern time very easily. And he also broke form, right? Like he made street art art. Before, people used to think street art is vandalism, but
Yeah.
now his work is considered art, and then that has opened up like an avenue for so many other young artists. And also, like, it's such an easier way to reach the youth today, because I think a lot of the young generation does not have the same appreciation for art. I think pop culture had a moment in the 70s, like pop artists had a moment in the 70s, like Roy Lichtenstein's work, for example. There was a moment, and then his style was repeated a lot. In the modern time, we've not had many artists like that, and I would put Banksy in that position. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great. I think that's a good start. For anyone that's curious about your work on the internet, what are some ways people can reach out to you in terms of reading your work or some of the projects that you're working on?
Yeah, so a lot of my work is unpublished, but I hope to publish a book very soon. So maybe when it's released, you can read that. But otherwise, I do post snippets of my work sometimes on Instagram and on Substack. Substack, I write about my thoughts on current affairs and things like that, which I feel close to, and a little sneak peek about my life. So the Substack and Instagram, and also my career. If you want to follow, then I update that on LinkedIn. But I don't like put my writing work there. So you can stay in touch with me in all these places.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Prachi. This was so much fun. And I think, yeah, I feel like we could talk for hours about books, but there's so many other facets of your life and the things you're curious about. And I'm always amazed and inspired by how you follow through on those passions and curiosities. So I hope we get to do this again, maybe
Yeah.
once your book is published, which I'm hopeful for. I will buy a copy because I'm very interested and curious about how you think about the world. So thank you. And for the listeners tuning in, stay tuned for more such episodes on this podcast. Again, these conversations are quite free flowing, and it's not just about the person, but about how they look at the world through their work, through their hobbies, through their curiosities. But yeah, Prachi, thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for having me. This was so fun.